Welcome into the Take the North podcast. I am Adam Studzinski. I produce the Take the North podcast. I'll be filling in today for David Haugh of 670 The Score. He is, I believe, back from Canton by now, but I'll be alongside, as usual, Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune, and we are here to discuss what's been a special week already for the Chicago Bears and the NFL Hall of Fame week. But also a little bit about the Bears preseason game that happened just a couple days ago. So welcome in, download, listen, subscribe to this podcast. If you haven't told a friend about it, tell a friend. This is going to be a great season coming up. But Dan, you are still in Canton, Ohio, as we're recording this on Saturday morning, several hours before the induction ceremony that will take place in Canton, Ohio. You've been there all week. So we'll just start here, Dan. What's your experience been like this week, taking in everything that's been going on in Canton?
It's always fun, and I was here in 2018 for Brian Urlacher's enshrinement, and things have changed here in a number of ways, and I'll get into a few of those changes in a little bit, but you're always struck by the history and the presence, and I'll give you a little snapshot of Friday afternoon when Colleen Kane and I from the Tribune finished our interviews over at the Canton Repository with Devin and Julius Peppers and Misty McMichael, and then found a spot at the Doubletree Hotel to just work for the afternoon in the lobby. And that's the hotel where all of the Hall of Famers stay. And so we're working right outside this bank of elevators, Adam, and literally every time the elevator door opens, it's somebody that is a football god, right? You're like, oh, hey, there's Warren Sapp. Oh, it's Bruce Smith. Oh, there's Emmitt Smith carrying his, Bluetooth speaker and blasting music as he walks through the lobby. Oh, there's Warren Moon. And so you literally every time the elevator doors open, that's what you're experiencing. And so you're just sort of awestruck, at every moment that you're here. Obviously, we've talked about the presence for Chicago and the presence for the Chicago Bears here this week, and it's just been notable to see the fan support, and then to just be back in the presence of guys like Devin Hester and Julius Peppers, and then obviously Misty McMichael as well, representing Steve. You're just struck by the emotion that all of them feel for what this means to them and to their families, and there's a gravity to it. And I think Devin is probably one of the more emotional guys you'll be around, and you felt that at several times throughout this week, just how heartfelt his gratitude is for finally sort of joining this fraternity where he feels he belongs. And that's been the coolest part about Devin, is he's always felt like he belongs in this group, and now to feel his appreciation for what he's getting to be a part of, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and you can tell in everything I've seen from Devin, like you were kind of saying, that he really appreciates what's happening this week. And he was upset when he didn't get in his first go around to 3 years ago, and probably equally upset when he didn't get in the second time. And so we can talk about Devin a little bit here, Dan, just because and there's some audio we'll play in a few minutes of that the Mully and Haugh show on 670 The Score did with him. And first of all, I mean, just the way that their shows were the last couple days, Thursday morning, Friday morning, sounded like exactly what you were saying. And
sitting in the same spot where they were recording.
Yeah. Yep. It's just like they're just grabbing people left and right. And is that Dwight Freeney? It is Dwight Freeney. Let's say, does he want to say hi? And so, and I know it helped that at least one day they had Jarrett Payton helping them out, kind of direct traffic. So it helps to have a guy like that around. But still, anyway, I do want to talk a little bit about Devin. I'm wearing a Devin Hester jersey. I'll be wearing this all day. He's my favorite Bears player of all time. I've mentioned that before on the podcast. So I think it's so cool that he finally is getting this recognition that I know me, you, David, and so many other people that follow Devin's career that are Bears fans believe he should have been in 2 years ago. And I know there's a lot that goes on with the way that the Hall of Fame elects their members. And it's difficult to get in. It's if between this and the Baseball Hall of Fame, it's either that or the Baseball Hall of Fame is the two most difficult Hall of Fames to get in, but that's a completely different topic. So when it comes to Devin, I feel like if you were somebody that followed his entire career, and by that I mean we're watching Bears games every Sunday, Monday, whatever, you felt the electricity when a punt was about to happen.
Yep.
And that's what he did. Like, he made a punt must-see TV. He made players like Charles Tillman, who could end up a Hall of Famer himself, want to be on the punt return team to block for Devin Hester because he knew that he was so special. And I think that kind of gravity tells
Yes.
you how important of a person he was in the history of the NFL.
Studs, I literally got goosebumps when you showed the 23 on your jersey just now, because you've like, I feel your excitement, and by extension, I feel the excitement of hundreds of thousands of Bears fans who know exactly the feelings that you had when Devin Hester was on the football field, right? And that's what this week is a celebration of. It's those feelings. And I'm writing a piece for Monday at chicagotribune.com, just documenting, like, look, like if you were a fan in the stands and Soldier Boy came on at Soldier Field, you were instantly amped, right? Like the adrenaline rush you had was crazy. Now multiply that by 5 and understand what it was like to be on a return unit with Devin. And so having the chance to talk to a Jason McKee and Israel Donajay, a John Gilmore, and understanding what Devin brought out of them. And they will tell you that, like, there was a heightened focus when you were on the field with Devin, because you understood that if you did your job to the best of your ability, you had the chance to unlock magic, and so, like, that feeling is cool. And then you talk to people that played against him or coached against him. Tony Dungy, prime example. The guy won a Super Bowl, right? And all he's asked about is, why did you kick the Devin Hester over that Super Bowl? Like, and so he has that feeling of, oh man, like I thought we were going to set this fearless tone in the Super Bowl, and then 12 seconds later, you're going to be answering questions for the rest of the time on why did you dare kick the Devin Hester. And I'll tell you another guy that I talked to recently that's really interesting to talk to is Chris Kluwe, Vikings punter, holds the distinction as being the guy who had more balls returned on him than anyone in history. And Chris will tell you, look, like, I punted to Devin 66 times. Nobody talks about the times that I angled it perfectly out of bounds at the 5. No one talks about the 56 yarder with great hang time that I had that was fair caught, because there was nothing that Devin can do with it. But they all talk about the 3 times that I got scored on, right? And so, like, the one that he brings up is from 2007, and you can go later and find this on YouTube. Perfect 54-yard angled kick, southwest corner of Soldier Field. Like, could not have kicked it any better. Said it was one of the best kicks of my life. Coverage unit gets down there. There's enough hang time to get around Devin. Devin catches it like a center fielder going back to the wall. He catches it at the 11, but his momentum takes him to the 6. By the time he stops to turn around, there's 4 or 5 Vikings players in position to tackle him. And yet he makes one cut, nice between one guy, cuts through another guy. The next thing you know, 89 yards later, he's in the end zone hosting one of those parties. And Kluwe's message on that one was, look, like, every single guy on our team did their job to the way we were coached and to the best of our ability. And it didn't matter, because Devin Hester was special, and he was so great that he made us pay regardless of how well we did our job. And that, to me, is one of those snapshot moments of what Devin was when you were going up against him.
Yeah, and the way that so many coaches just this week, but I mean, since he's retired, when he was playing, will tell you about, like, the thing they thought about the most all week getting ready for that game against the Bears was, what are we going to do about Devin Hester?
100%.
How are we going to kick to him? Are we going to kick to him? If we do kick to him, where are we going to put the ball? We got to make sure there's enough hang time. It's like, it was keeping coaches up at night. And like, that's such an incredible thing when you're thinking about a kick returner that might only be on the field 4 or 5 times during a game, and it's giving the coaches that much nightmare. And something I want to mention about Devin that I think is so underrated, because, and I think it has to do with what you were just telling about that Vikings return, and you can see it even on his most famous kick, which is the kick return, the Super Bowl return, of course. But his field vision was so special.
Ridiculous.
And, like, I think that his speed obviously gave him the ability to do what he did, but his field vision was so unique. He could find that one crease that he needed, and then his speed and his agility was such that he could put his foot in the ground and he would just be gone. And so few people in the history of the league had that ability to see where he needed to go in order to get the ball where he wanted to be.
Well, and Jason McKee has talked at length about this, and I talked with him back in the winter when Devin got voted in, about, like, sitting up in the hotel room the night before the game and asking Devin, like, how do you do this? Like, what exactly is your process? And the vision is one thing that I think was highly underrated, as you mentioned, and just the ability to see. And, like, Devin will walk you through it. It's almost like he could see 2 seconds ahead of everyone else.
Yeah.
Like, so he could see where an opening was coming well before it opened. And, like, that instinct and vision, and then you combine it with the absolutely electric speed, the strength. I think that people that coached and played with him say that, like, Devin's stronger than you think he is. And so there were a lot of those returns where he broke 2 or 3 tackles, and found a way to get extra yards. Here's the other thing that I'll say for me that gets overshadowed a little bit is everyone says, oh, he's getting in as a return specialist. Oh, he's getting in as a return specialist. I don't have the stats in front of me, but for 6 years, he played receiver for the Bears. And 2 of those years, he led the team in receiving yards, and so like, this is a guy that on the NFL level was forced to train himself to play a position that, like he hadn't played since he was a kid. And so you've got this special gift because the Bears knew that his danger was with the ball in his hands. And when teams started kicking away from him and being like, we're not going to give you a chance to break this game open, the Bears said, oh yeah, well watch, we're going to try to make him into a weapon offensively. And no, was he a Pro Bowl receiver? Absolutely not. But again, he led the Bears in receiving yards for 2 years, learning that position on the job at the highest level of football. And I don't think that gets talked about enough. And I think that the work that Devin put into that is something that he takes great pride in. I think it's something that the coaches that were around him truly appreciate. And it's something to illuminate a little bit on this day today, where he'll get up on the stage right over here at Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium and have his moment to talk about his career in a way that's going to be fascinating to hear what comes out of his mouth, and his mom, Juanita Brown, introducing him as well. I think it's going to be an emotional segment here at the Hall of Fame proceedings. Right.
And here, I just pulled up his receiving stats right now. So his receiving stats in his career, most of this came in Chicago, he had 3,300 receiving yards and 16 receiving touchdowns and 255 receptions. So for a guy that's not a lot, but hey, by Bears standards, that's pretty.
Yeah, right.
So, and one of those years, so his best year was in 2009. He had 757 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. So that was the first year with Jay Cutler, I believe.
And I think 08, I think he had somewhere around 600 in 08. I think that was the other year he led the team in receiving yards. So look, like the Bears were challenged in the passing attack, as we know, for a long time, but Devin gave him a spark, and to be able to have that impact on a game, even when, teams decided, hey, you're not going to impact us special teams wise. Well, we're going to find a way to make you a chess piece on offense. And he did that pretty well as well.
And I think that it would have been really interesting to see a player like him in the modern NFL. Like the way that they use players now, I think would have been better for him offensively. But before we get too much further down the line here, I do want to play this short interview that Mully and Haugh of 670 The Score did with Devin a couple days ago. So this is Mully and our own David Haugh talking with Devin Hester. I believe this was Thursday at some point. So here you go.
Talk to you when you didn't get in. You were a little upset because perhaps you wanted to be the first-time guy, but now you go. We talked to Dave Tobe. Everyone's coming. You must be delighted. It must be a thrill.
Yeah, it's a pleasure and it's an honor. As a Hall of Famer, it's whenever you get in, either it's your first year or your last year or 20 years from now, you know what I mean? When I talk to a lot of guys that waited 15, 20 years, it's always like the first, you know what I mean? So I'm just right now so honored. It's only 378 players in the entire world that play football that was able to say that they're Hall of Famers. So I'm just honored right now to be one of those guys.
Your mom is presenting you, is that correct?
Yes.
And what do you expect her to say? Have you checked out the speech beforehand?
I don't know what she's going to say. She haven't told me, that's something that I don't want to hear till it's time for it to happen. But I chose my mom because I know at the end of the day, she probably was the biggest part of my career.
We talked about today about just your evolution of your career. When you came to Chicago, you had the flair, but I don't know if you had the confidence, and you almost had to gain that on the field. How far can you reflect on how far you have come since that rookie season, 2006, when you show up in Chicago ready to prove yourself?
Yeah, it was a whirlwind for me, just more so of the first 2 years, people didn't believe I could do what I do, and the following 4 or 5 years from now, people respected me. So they whenever I was out on the field, they feared me. So it limited the returns that I had. So that played a big toll in my career, I would say. Just with the new rule nowadays, I probably would have had over 40 returns. But it is what it is.
What do you think of the new kickoff? It's almost like a run play from what we're looking at.
Right. I feel like the new rule is really going to force the return game, bring it back to life. And so it's a way to bring back special team. It's a way to bring back the returners that kind of got shadowed and overlooked because of the new rule. Of course, y'all know the rule was put in because of me. So
that's right.
Now it allows return to get their hands on the ball. So I'm hoping that we can bring back this return game, which was a big exciting part of the game.
It's an impossible question to answer, kind of like asking your favorite child, but which is your favorite return?
I would say my favorite return would probably have to be. I have two, really, I can say. Probably the Arizona Cardinals and then, of course, the Super Bowl.
Yeah, we actually played both those today. So listen, we'll let you go. I'm surprised you don't have, like, Soulja Boy playing behind you. Are you going to do that when you're inducted?
Nah.
A lot of old teammates coming this weekend.
It's probably about 30, 40 of them.
Oh,
yeah.
Congratulations.
Appreciate you guys.
Love you, man. God bless.
All right, you guys. Take it easy, man.
All right, so there you go. Again, that was Devin Hester talking with Mully and Haugh of 670 to score. So what do you think about that, Dan? Again, short and sweet. They had so few time with a lot of guys, but
Yeah.
I like his thoughts about the new kickoff, how he thinks he would have had about 40 returns. He's probably not wrong. And also, I mean, the fact that he has so many guys coming to support him. He said like 30 or 40 former teammates are coming out to support him.
That's one of the two things that caught me in that clip there is it's just the way people feel about Devin. And like he has always carried himself with this cool blend of self-assurance and humility. You know, he's a soft-spoken guy, but it's not a lack of self-confidence by any stretch of the imagination. And when you feel both of those things together, it's just a magnetic personality he's had. And then he mentions the Arizona return. Everybody talks about the Super Bowl, but I think you can probably take yourself back to that Monday night in 2006 and what that game signified for that team. You know, that was an absolute signature moment on a primetime stage for a team that showed we don't need offense to win a football game. They literally didn't need offense to win a football game.
And Rex Grossman had 6 turnovers.
Was it 6? I knew it was at least 5. And all of a sudden,
4 picks and 2 fumbles.
You get 3 touchdowns from defense and special teams. You know, and the last one being one that I talk about forever because Scott Player, the punter that was victimized there, says that like I had zero intention of kicking the football down the middle of the field. Like I had been warned all week. Antrell Roll, who was a teammate of Devin's at the U, said don't put the ball anywhere near him. And yet Brendan Iambadejo creates enough of a rush off Scott Player's right side that he's got to alter the angle of his punt. And then it's right down the middle of the hashes. And then Devin's able to do Devin. And so it's just like, the reason that victory is so significant to so many people in the Bears organization is because it was the ultimate team win in a season where it sort of announced that the Bears are who we thought they were, right? Like in Chicago, we thought they were a Super Bowl contender and they did end up winning the NFC Championship, fell a little bit short in the Super Bowl. But that moment for Devin was one of so many that really just captured everyone's imagination and attention and said, yeah, this guy's the real deal.
So one real quick story about that game from my own point of view, and then we'll move on to Mongo here. So I was in high school at the time, and we didn't have where I lived is literally like the end of the road in my parents' house in the middle of nowhere. So we didn't have like high-speed internet or cable at that time. I happened to be at my high school late that night getting ready for like the musical or something like that I was participating in. So I was watching the game at the high school and because we didn't have ESPN at home. And then I get home at halftime and I just get online on my dial-up internet to check the score again and they're still losing. And I was so upset. I was like, screw this. I'm just going to go to bed. And I wake up the next morning. Yeah, I wake up the next morning, I'm eating breakfast, and my dad goes, you know, the Bears won last night? And I was like, what? And so I get to school, and I'm looking up the highlights and everything, and I was like, that's crazy. So I didn't get to personally witness the comeback live, but I've obviously watched it since. So, yeah, that was I don't know if I've ever actually told that story publicly, that I didn't actually get to witness that.
I mean, full-fledged adrenaline rush, obviously. And then the last thing I'll say is before we transition to Steve is just that, you know, everybody's got a favorite return, you know, and you know, like John Gilmore, who was with Devin for a couple seasons, said that the missed field goal in New York, right? Where Devin just catches it and he kind of slow plays it, and then he comes out, and they were just like, "This dude is different." Like just the self-assurance and the fearlessness and the ability to just make something out of nothing was something that defined him. And then a lot of people will talk about the Rams game, another Monday nighter, two return touchdowns. The second one when the Bears were anticipating an onside kick, and they didn't even have blockers for him. It was the hands team out there ready for an onside kick, and Devin still takes it to the house and does what he did so many times in his career.
See, and we had this almost like 20-minute conversation about Devin Hester and barely mentioned the Super Bowl return, which tells you how special he really was. And that was his defining moment.
Signature moment for sure.
Yeah,
iconic.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead. I don't want to overshadow Steve McMichael here, because this recognition as we transition here for Steve Mongo McMichael is long overdue, and I'll defer to you a lot here, Dan, because I didn't get to watch Mongo play a lot. The end of his career was when I was really young and wasn't really cognizant of football. So I know what I know about him is from the highlights, and I know famously, obviously him being part of the '85 team. I know his longevity, but him being able to now enter the Hall of Fame and having been afflicted with this terrible disease, ALS, and being able to still be with us to witness this moment, I think is so incredibly special. And, you mentioned Misty has been there this week, and the Hall of Fame is going to do something at his home. And he lives in Homer Glen, right?
Homer Glen, yep, correct.
The Hall of Fame is doing something for him and his family there. So it's just, I think this is going to be the most emotional moment of the whole weekend when they do his induction coming up later this afternoon.
I saw a clip from when Steve got into the Hall back in the winter, and it's a clip from Steve's bedroom with a bunch of old teammates and family and friends around him, and you can see the expression in his eyes, right? Like Steve is bedridden, he's motionless, he can't speak anymore. The expression in his eyes spoke more than anything could, the excitement, the pride. For him to still be alive, to experience this moment, to have the Hall of Fame coming to his house, to give him his gold jacket, to unveil the bust for him. I can't imagine the swell of pride that he will have inside of himself to be able to be here through what has been an absolutely brutal and vicious fight with ALS. And so that's the emotion of the weekend for sure. I've been so grateful during my time on the Bears beat for the Tribune to have had a relationship with Steve, and it really kind of spiked in 2019 when I wrote a long deep dive on who he was. That was during the 100th season of the Bears, and kind of talking about, in his own words, one of the guys who enjoyed it the most, right? And like, I think you talk to people that played with him, and when you look at Steve McMichael's production, it's Hall of Fame worthy. When you look at the dedication he had, it's Hall of Fame worthy. The number that will jump out to you is the 191 consecutive games, 203 if you count the playoffs, at an era where there wasn't the things, the resources available to players to take care of themselves, to recover, at a time where the rules weren't designed to protect football players. And so to see the punishment he doled out, took on, and always made himself available on game days, it tells you everything about who he was. He had a dedication to the sport. He had a dedication to himself, but most of all, a dedication to his teammates and his coaches. That is what has made him so respected by those in the Bears organization. And so to see that honored today in what is obviously a multi-layered emotional day for Steve and his family, it's truly pretty cool. And Colleen Kane and I went out to the Stark County Fairgrounds last night, where they were doing a little bit of an ALS fundraiser out there, but the Chicago Six performed. And so out at the fairgrounds was Dan Hampton on guitar, Otis Wilson on the mic, and Jim McMahon was in attendance. And so you still feel the love that those guys have for Steve, and the everlasting friendship and bond that 85 iconic team had, and really all those teams of the 80s that achieved more than any that we've seen since in Bears history.
I think that is so telling, the way that his teammates from those famous 80s Bears teams, the way that they revere him. And, guys like Dan Hampton, and Mike Singleterry, you can keep going down the list.
Right, another one, yeah.
All these guys talk about him, and the amount of respect they have for him as a player. I mean, not just as a person, as a player, and how much they thought he was such a key piece of the 85 championship team, and the 86 team that was also extremely good. And I mean, heck, I just pulled up his statistics in front of me here. He had one year in 1988 where he had 11 and a half sacks as an interior defensive lineman. 11 and a half sacks in the 80s is incredible. And I believe when he retired, was he the leader in defensive tackle sacks at the time he retired? And if he wasn't the leader, he was really close to the top.
I mean, he played for sure.
He played for 14 years as an interior defensive lineman. I mean, that is incredible.
And never missed time. And that's the incredible part. We talk about the Arizona game being sort of that regular season signature moment for the 06 Bears. Well, 44-0, Week 11 in Dallas in 1985 is the signature moment for that Bears defense, and where they, I wrote a little bit about it from the eyes of Steve's sister, Kathy, as a guy who was from Freer, Texas, went on to an All-American career at the University of Texas, and came back to Texas Stadium that weekend to announce to the world that the Bears were for real. Everson Walls, cornerback for the Cowboys, famously said the week leading up, "The Bears haven't played anybody yet. We'll see how good they really are." The Bears beat them 44-0, and Dan Hampton famously said after the game, "We still haven't played anybody," right? Which is it was that exclamation point that told those guys on that team. As Gary Fensick told me this offseason, that announced to them inside the locker room that, yes, this Super Bowl talk that we're having is very real. This isn't foolhardy dreaming here. This is like, we are good enough to win the Super Bowl, and win it they did. Obviously, one loss in Miami that year, but then an absolute stampede through the postseason where, the very first points they allowed in the postseason was a field goal drive in the Super Bowl after the Bears fumbled inside their own territory. And so that tells you everything about what that defense was, and obviously what Steve meant to him.
So we have one more audio clip here. This is from Mike Singletary, who was on with the Mully and Haugh show Friday morning from Canton, Ohio. So this was what Mike Singletary, who, again, one of the greatest players, obviously a Hall of Famer, one of the greatest players in Bears history and NFL history, set the standard, helped reset the standard, whatever you want to say, for middle linebacker play in the NFL. This is what he had to say about his former teammate going into the Hall of Fame.
It really is remarkable. It's a tremendous story, and I'm just really excited for him. I'm excited for his family, and everything that Steve has been a part of all of this time is just tremendous honor.
What made him a Hall of Fame teammate to you?
If I had to think of one word, consistency. He was always there. Whether he was hurt, I don't care what the situation was, it's very difficult to get him to come out of the game for any reason at all. But very unselfish, tremendous teammate.
So great stuff there. Yeah, Studs. I mean, you hear the words from Samurai Mike there, the consistency, the dependability, the unselfishness. That's who Steve was inside that locker room to that team. And Singletary's been one of those guys who said that he didn't truly appreciate the greatness of Steve McMichael until Steve McMichael was no longer in front of him, taking blockers off of him, right? And then you go, oh man, like I made a lot of tackles over the years while Steve was in front of me because he absorbed blockers and allowed me to run around and be whatever Mike was, a 7-time All-Pro or whatever it ended up being, but obviously a Pro Football Hall of Famer, right? And so now that defense has 3 defensive linemen in the Hall of Fame, a linebacker in the Hall of Fame, Jimbo Covert, Mike Ditka, Walter Payton. Like the 85 Bears are well represented, and Steve getting in is a nice exclamation point on that. The other thing that I'll tell you that I really came to appreciate as Steve and I talked more and more about his career over the years is he would talk about the Monday film sessions being the currency for those guys in the locker room, and how you looked forward to getting in to those sessions and hearing Buddy Ryan break them down and trying to be the guy that the other teammates around you felt proud of because of the contribution you made to a play. And so when you have a group of guys dedicated to each other in that way, where it was like, man, I just want to make the guy next to me proud of me. Holy cow, you can accomplish some magical things. Clearly that team did in 1985, and they won 5 consecutive division championships. It's not like everyone that says they're a one-hit wonder. It's really damn hard to win a Super Bowl. They won one. They probably should have had another, but that run has not been matched by any era of Bears history since. And so really, really special time. And obviously Steve, a very special part of that.
Right. And it's just that in like 86, for instance, I mean, if Jim McMahon stays healthy, they probably do win again in 86.
You're starting Doug Flutie in a playoff game, right? Like,
because I mean, yeah. And so, and also just again on Steve, like what I've gathered about him just by listening to people this week is how smart he was as a player, and how smart you had to be to play in that Buddy Ryan 46. Because you think of the 85 Bears and you think of them as just monsters and, just blitz crazy, but it wasn't just blitzing the blitz. Like, it was a really complex defense, especially for the 1980s. And you had to be smart. You had to know what your job was, what the guy next to you was, what the guy behind you was doing. And so that's why Buddy Ryan hated rookies apparently because they didn't understand they talked about how it took multiple years to learn how to really run this system. And Steve was one of these guys that was really smart, that knew his job and knew what he needed to do. And, heck, like, even if it's just like Singletary you were talking about, just keeping guys off the linebackers so they can make the play.
Well, and listen, like, we know Steve was a showman. We know that he had that Mongo personality. We know what the persona was. He obviously went on to a career in pro wrestling because he fit that world in a lot of ways. But his intelligence and his wisdom is something that everyone that's ever been around him truly appreciates. You think about his contributions to Chicago and you just think presence, right? Like, that he is so beloved by Bears fans, not only because of what he did as a player, but when he was done playing, he stayed in the community. He did charitable events. Whenever he was at a memorabilia signing or a bar or doing an appearance, he interacted with the fans and he appreciated everything that the Bears meant to them and what his part in that was. One of my favorite quotes from Steve is, if you think I'm something special, I'm happy to agree with you, which is one of the greatest lines ever, because he always understood that there was a give and take with the fans that he truly leaned into. And when you do that, you become even more beloved than you were as a ferocious playmaker for an iconic defense. And so it tells you a little bit why this is as emotional of a journey as it's been for Bears fans to go along with Steve on this truly horrific final chapter of his life. But to see him get this honor here, I think will provide a level of fulfillment and validation that really will be second to none.
And we should mention that Jarrett Payton, who, if you haven't listened to the episode that we dropped, it would be 2 episodes ago now, earlier this week, that an interview that you did with Jarrett, who's inducting Steve into the Hall of Fame. He's doing his induction speech. You should listen to that because it's really good. And you guys talked a lot about what Steve has meant to Jarrett, especially since Walter, his father, died. And so that was a really great episode. And so if you haven't listened to that, I highly recommend it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what Jarrett has to say today. I should have looked this up. Is Jarrett the first person to ever do 2 induction speeches?
Two introductions. And I think he was going into 6th grade when he did it for his father, Walter. And many, many years ago in a class that also included Chuck Noll and Dan Fouts and some other legends. But by the way, as we're recording this, major flashes of lightning over the stadium here. So I don't know how weather is going to affect today's proceedings. We'll see if there's any delay. We already had a suspended Hall of Fame game that ended mercifully before the 4th quarter began. I digress. One other thing on Jarrett Payton. It's really cool to be around him in this environment. I told you about the elevator banks at the Doubletree. I was just hanging out, talking with Jarrett for a little while in the lobby, and Andre Johnson came up to say hello to him, another member of the class of 24 here at the Hall of Fame. And you realize that Jarrett's connection to this class run deeper than anything. He's presenting Steve McMichael. He was a 5th-year senior at the U when Devin Hester came on campus. He played most of his career in the same huddle as Andre Johnson. And so you feel this level of things. And then Jarrett told us a story the other night about how he was doing a little bit of a late night broadcast from inside the Hall of Fame after the Hall of Fame had closed, right? So he's literally like the last person inside the Hall of Fame the other night. And a couple workers coming up, like looking like, what do you like? Why are you still here? It's closed. And then, you have the ultimate trump card. Oh yeah. Like, my dad's one of the busts that sleeps upstairs here. So like, I'm just going to finish my broadcast here and then roll out. So really cool for him to be in this setting.
Jarrett has some stories. I mean, he was a member of that. He was a member of probably the best college football team of all time, that 2001-2 Miami squad. So he's well connected and he's got some stories.
Let me tell you this, and we need to get him back on periodically because of all the stories he has to tell. One of my favorites of all time is, he's probably an 8 or 9-year-old kid, and he's getting ready for bed, and the doorbell rings, and he goes to answer the door, like, who's coming over to the house at this late? Well, Michael Jordan's at the house coming over to play poker. And like, of course, that's what happens in your childhood when you're Jarrett Payton and you're living with the greatest football player of all time, and then the greatest basketball player of all time comes over to play poker on a random weeknight.
All right. And so I know we got to wrap up here soon, Dan. So anything at all to take away from the Bears' first preseason win, which was technically a win, rain shortened, as you mentioned. Brett Rippon had a really good game with 3 touchdowns, and Colin Johnson, who was on the practice squad receiver last season, had a great game as well.
Yeah, just to kind of encapsulate that night on Thursday night, you got 2 guys who are veterans, who are fighting for a role. And I never take it for granted covering these preseason games that can get a little bit mundane and boring, and to the outside world, they don't really mean anything. But when you sit in a post-game press conference and you feel the emotion of guys like Colin Johnson and Brett Rippon fighting for their professional careers and feeling the satisfaction they have in seizing a moment. And that's what it was on Thursday night. It was a moment for them to seize. They seized it. Obviously, there's 3 more preseason games to go and a lot of things to sort out. But you just have an appreciation for how hard some of these guys are working to carve out a niche. So that was my biggest takeaway from Thursday night. We'll have a lot more in the week ahead. And then we go to Buffalo, which is, a trip that I was kind of dreading for a while, but it'll be Caleb Williams' first time in an NFL football field. And so now it's got, a level of intrigue that is far above what I thought it would be when I originally saw the preseason schedule. And so, yeah, get me on that plane to Buffalo next week. And let's go see Caleb play.
All right. So we'll pretty much just wrap it up there, Dan. And, and by the way, Colin Johnson, easy guy to root for. You listen to him talk after the game. We had him on the Score on Friday. If you want to check that out, really, really thoughtful guy and easy to root for. And he gave us a tease that Hard Knocks is going to be following him around a little bit this weekend. So he's probably going to be a feature.
So last thing on that topic before we sign off here. Number one, some of these preview clips from Hard Knocks, the one the other day of Caleb Williams standing up in front of the room and announcing his signing bonus and Tyson Bagent having a pretend seizure is like that. I was rolling on the floor laughing in the press box when I saw that for the first time. And secondly, a tease for the Take the North podcast. We're going to have a little special Hard Knocks preview edition coming up, hopefully early this next week before the first episode airs. And so that's an exciting thing. Definitely check back early in the week because we should have some sort of exclusive content on what to expect from what's going to be a cool 6-week series of Hard Knocks. That's
right. So keep it tuned here to the Take the North podcast as we whatever we do see from the Hall of Fame induction this weekend, you'll be able to discuss being there, Dan. David will be back with us this week. And so for Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune, I am Adam Studzinski. This has been the Take the North podcast. Stay tuned. We have a lot more coming your way in the coming weeks, and we'll talk to you next time.
Great talk. See you out there.